On the evening of the 22nd of February 2026, at precisely 7:43 in the evening, Buckingham Palace released a statement that the first 3 journalists to read it assumed was a formatting error. It carried none of the hallmarks of a significant royal announcement. There was no press conference convened in a gilded room with carefully positioned microphones. There was no ceremonial backdrop, no coordinated photograph, no briefing issued in advance to trusted correspondents who would shape the initial coverage in directions the palace preferred. There was only a land registry amendment embedded inside the palace's routine evening correspondence digest, accompanied by 7 sentences so understated in their presentation that their content took a full moment to register. And then it did. In accordance with the joint private will of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the private codicil of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, a designated section of the Balmoral estate, formerly known as the West Enclosure, has been formally bequeathed to Lady Louise Windsor, to be known henceforth as Little Balmoral Manor. Within 20 minutes, the phones inside Clarence House were ringing. Within 40, a dinner at Sandringham had been abandoned mid-course. And inside one particular private residence, whose occupant had spent the better part of 2 years constructing an elaborate and well-funded plan, premised entirely on the assumption that this land would be available, a single lamp burned until 3 in the morning. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you enjoy these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you definitely don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and helps you stay up to date as every new royal moment unfolds. And while you're here, let us know, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments below. It's always wonderful to see viewers joining us from all around the world. The public, when the announcement reached them, responded with the particular stunned silence of people who have just been shown that a secret was kept from them not for days or weeks, but for years, and kept with a discipline so absolute that not one credible whisper of it had ever escaped into the vast and voracious ecosystem of royal commentary that monitors the monarchy's every breath. No veteran court watcher had mapped it. No royal biographer had detected its outline. No seasoned correspondent with decades of carefully cultivated palace sources had caught even the faintest tremor of what had been moving, quietly and with extraordinary deliberation, beneath the surface of everything the public thought they understood about the future of the Balmoral estate. The assumption, held universally and apparently reasonably, had been that the entirety of Balmoral would remain intact and indivisible under King Charles III, governed by the same unbroken institutional tradition that had held it since Prince Albert purchased the estate in 1852. That a private portion could be surgically and legally separated from the whole, placed beyond the reach of the Crown estate and the institutional monarchy entirely, and transferred into the hands of a 21-year-old with no formal title and no working royal role, had simply never entered the calculus of anyone paid to anticipate exactly these kinds of developments. And that those who had been closest to the late Queen would say with quiet satisfaction in the days that followed, was entirely by design. Understand what Lady Louise Windsor has inherited, one must first understand what Little Balmoral Manor actually is, because the land registry entry communicates none of it. Located approximately 4 kilometers southwest of the main Balmoral Castle, the estate encompasses roughly 187 acres of terrain that the word property does not adequately describe. It is wilder than Windsor and older feeling than Sandringham. Forested glens give way to open moorland without warning. Granite outcrops rise from the earth with the indifference of things that predate every human claim ever made upon them. A narrow stone bridge, believed to date from the late 1800s, stands half-hidden among ancient birch trees and leads to a modest glade where the Queen Mother sat during wartime to write in a journal she allowed no one to read. The estate includes a restored Edwardian hunting lodge with 3 fireplaces and oak-paneled reading rooms worn smooth by generations of quiet occupation. 2 archival cabins sit tucked behind a rhododendron thicket so dense that aerial photography had never successfully resolved them. A granite stone chapel barely large enough to seat 10 stands at the estate's inner edge, its roof covered in Scottish slate, its interior stripped of everything except a simple wooden altar and a single carved plaque bearing 4 words that would become the most quoted phrase of the entire inheritance story. Service, not spectacle. It was here that Queen Elizabeth II would retreat when the weight of the crown became something a sovereign could no longer carry in public. Former groundskeepers describe a woman transformed by the landscape, arriving with a single footman and her black Labrador, and spending up to 2 weeks moving between the lodge, the chapel, and the lochside trails, as though the act of walking this specific ground was itself a form of governance. Prince Philip, in a letter written to his private secretary in 2004 and now held within the archival cabins of the estate itself, called it the one place she truly breathes. For 8 months before the announcement, a young woman had been arriving at the outer gatehouse of the West Enclosure on quiet Thursday afternoons, always in countryside tweeds, always accompanied by a single female security officer, always alone in every sense that mattered. She rode horses at dawn and walked the perimeter at dusk. She visited the chapel without ceremony and reviewed handwritten documents under the mentorship of 2 archivists formerly attached to the late Queen's personal correspondence team. She assessed property upkeep and rehearsed the responsibilities of stewardship with the quiet diligence of someone who understood that what she was being prepared for was not a gift, but a trust. She never spoke to the press. She gave no interviews. She made no indication, public or private, that anything of significance was approaching. Records later confirmed what locals in Aberdeenshire had begun quietly whispering since June 2025. It was Lady Louise Windsor, and she had not been handed the keys. She had been earning them, one silent Thursday at a time, for longer than anyone outside a very small and very deliberate circle had been permitted to know. What that circle had also known, and what was about to become devastatingly clear, was that someone else had been circling the same ground with architectural drawings already commissioned, donor networks already activated, and a certainty so complete it had never occurred to them to verify it. That certainty was about to meet the deed that had already been sealed, and the collision would reshape the House of Windsor in ways that are still being felt. There is a particular kind of strategic miscalculation that is only visible in its full dimensions after the moment of failure has already passed. Not the miscalculation of insufficient planning or inadequate resources, but the deeper and more humiliating miscalculation of a plan built on a premise that was never verified, because it never occurred to the planner that verification was necessary. Queen Camilla's operation to claim cultural dominance over the Scottish royal landscape was not a casual ambition. It was a structured, resourced, and professionally executed strategic initiative that had been in development for the better part of 2 years. It had architectural drawings. It had donor networks. It had internal memos, budget projections, and branded heritage programming meticulously designed to achieve a specific and clearly understood objective. What it did not have, because no one involved in constructing it had thought to check, was any awareness that the land at the center of everything had already been legally transferred to someone else. Not recently, not hastily, but years before the first proposal was ever drafted, in a sealed codicil witnessed by a consort and administered by a princess whose administrative precision made the entire operation irrelevant before it began. The paper trail of Camilla's plan, when it finally surfaced, told a story of ambition operating at a scale most outside observers had not associated with a woman whose public positioning had always emphasized warmth, literary sensibility, and a carefully maintained distance from overt institutional power plays. The Crown Literary Circle, her charitable foundation, submitted its formal proposal on the 12th of November 2025. The document ran to 47 pages. It included detailed architectural renderings of a refurbished garden landscape, budget estimates pre-approved by a consortium of private donors with strong and long-standing social ties to the Parker Bowles family network, and a projected cultural programming model built around Scottish literary heritage, writer residencies, and what the proposal described as cultural reconciliation initiatives for northern audiences. The language was polished, and the ambition was genuine. And the geographic coordinates embedded in the proposal's appendix matched the boundaries of Little Balmoral Manor with a precision that eliminated any possibility of coincidence. This was not a proposal for land in the vicinity of Balmoral. This was a proposal for that specific land, drafted by people who were certain it would be available and had never thought to confirm that certainty against the actual state of the title deed. Tom Parker Bowles had been the operational architect of the philanthropic scaffolding surrounding the plan. Throughout the autumn of 2025, his network of boutique cultural patrons, several of them long-standing contributors to heritage preservation initiatives with strong Scottish institutional connections, had been quietly briefed on the retreat concept in terms that assumed its eventual realization as a settled matter. Scottish heritage partnerships had been established. Preliminary conversations with local planning authorities had been initiated. A zoning application had been drafted, reviewed, and held in readiness for submission the moment a formal announcement created the opening it was designed to fill. None of the people involved in those conversations had been told that the land in question was not available. An internal memo from Camilla's office, dated the 5th of December 2025, referenced what it called public aesthetic legacy gaps north of Hadrian's Wall. The phrasing was institutional and carefully constructed to survive external scrutiny, but its meaning was precise. Scotland had never fully warmed to Camilla in the way that parts of England had, cautiously and incrementally, over the years of her marriage to Charles. The landscapes and estates most powerfully identified with Elizabeth's private legacy were concentrated exactly in the territories where Camilla's symbolic presence was weakest. Little Balmoral was not simply a beautiful piece of Highland real estate. It was the single most powerful available lever for repositioning her as the cultural guardian of Elizabeth's Scotland. The plan had not been casual, and losing it was not a disappointment. It was the structural collapse of an architecture 2 years in the making. What Camilla's operation had never accounted for was Princess Anne. Operating in a capacity as executive of private estate affairs for Queen Elizabeth that had never been publicly disclosed, Anne had spent the preceding 14 months constructing a legal perimeter around the inheritance so complete and so deliberately sequenced that no external pressure, however well-resourced or institutionally connected, could find a point of entry. She had reclassified the property staff payroll at Little Balmoral under the Royal Heritage Trust rather than the Crown Estate, a single administrative decision that legally detached the land from the institutional monarchy and rendered it immune to reabsorption through any standard channel. She had coordinated 3 separate document transfers from the late Queen's Highland Archive to Louise's private holding team, each timed specifically to preempt any review window that might allow interference. And she had done all of it without a single public statement or a single visible movement that might have alerted those who were watching. Sophie had monitored drone flyovers above the estate perimeter and unauthorized photography traced to consulting firms connected to Parker Bowles donors, responding by installing signal jamming fencing and hiring former cyber intelligence officers without alerting the press. Edward had received Camilla's personal call in early January 2026 and delivered the reply that ended every remaining avenue of approach. "My daughter will not be a placeholder for your ambitions. You had your time. Now let her have what her grandmother gave her, without a script and without your shadow." When Camilla's office submitted its formal review petition to the Privy Purse legal unit, framing it carefully as a procedural clarification rather than a direct challenge, Anne's denial arrived within 12 hours. 4 sentences, sovereign in nature, sealed in will, codified with consort's witness. No review shall be granted. The plan was not defeated in the moment the denial arrived. It had been defeated years before anyone inside Clarence House had thought to look. There are moments in the life of a public institution when the gap between the story it has been telling and the story the public actually believes becomes impossible to manage through the usual instruments of narrative control. Press briefings lose their authority. Carefully worded statements land without the weight their authors intended. And the space between what the institution says and what the public feels widens with a speed that no communications strategy, however experienced or well-resourced, can adequately close. The announcement of Lady Louise Windsor's inheritance of Little Balmoral Manor created exactly that kind of moment, not because it was controversial, but because it was true in a way that bypassed the machinery of managed perception entirely and landed directly on something the public had been quietly waiting to feel for years. Authenticity, restraint, the radical and increasingly rare spectacle of someone within the royal family doing something not for visibility, but despite it. Within 48 hours, the response had written its own headlines without assistance from any palace communications office. Little Balmoral trended across every major British and Commonwealth social platform before midnight on the first day. Service not spectacle, the 4 words carved into the estate's private chapel plaque, traveled across social media with the organic velocity of a phrase that arrives at exactly the moment its audience has been waiting for it. Louise Windsor era appeared in communities historically indifferent or actively hostile to the monarchy. Among younger demographics, the institution had spent years and considerable resources attempting to reach through programming and positioning that had never quite connected. In Glasgow bookshops and Edinburgh cafes, murals and illustrations began appearing depicting Louise not in tiaras or ceremonial dress, but in field jackets and boots, carrying archival boxes, reading beside a lock, walking alone through pine forest. The imagery was not coordinated. It did not need to be. It was the visual language of a public that had recognized something genuine and was recording that recognition in the only medium available to it. Catherine's response arrived not through any official channel, but through a single Instagram post that had been thought about with the precision its simplicity concealed. A black and white photograph, a handwritten card in her own elegant cursive. Legacy is not what we receive, it is what we choose to preserve. Tagged simply with Little Balmoral and Windsor Duty, it gathered 2 million likes in under 3 hours. Royal analysts read its significance correctly and immediately. Catherine had not consulted the palace communications office. She had cleared the post personally with William and instructed her aides not to elaborate under any circumstances. The message was designed to be felt rather than explained, and it accomplished exactly that with an efficiency that no formal statement could have matched. What it also accomplished, with the particular devastation of things said quietly in public, was to draw a line of visible institutional distance between Kensington Palace and Clarence House that everyone who needed to understand it understood immediately. Against this backdrop, Camilla's countermove arrived with a timing so catastrophic, it seemed almost designed to confirm every unflattering comparison the public was already drawing. 29 minutes after Buckingham Palace confirmed the launch of Louise and Anne's joint archival project, The Quiet Years, Camilla's office announced the Crown's Compassion exhibition at St. George's Hall. The launch on March 1st was attended by a roster of senior royals so conspicuously thin that the absences dominated every account of the event. Charles delayed his appearance by a full day. Anne declined. Catherine declined. The exhibition's content, nearly half of it personal photographs, with captions emphasizing Camilla's proximity to Charles and her appearances alongside royal regalia, prompted a royal historian present at the opening to deliver a verdict that traveled considerably further than the room it was spoken in. It is not a tribute to service. It is a scrapbook of proximity. By March 3rd, the Royal Collection Trust had quietly removed the exhibition's primary banner from its website. By March 4th, ticket sales had been suspended. The official explanation cited renovation works. No farewell statement was issued. The palace's homepage was updated the same afternoon with a single new lead feature, The Quiet Years, opening spring 2026, curated by Lady Louise Windsor and HRH Princess Anne. Beneath it, a quote from Elizabeth that required no commentary. What is remembered with dignity endures longer than what is displayed for applause. The long gallery confrontation at Windsor Castle on the evening of March 5th was witnessed by enough people that its details could not be contained. Camilla, visibly shaken in a manner those who knew her described as entirely uncharacteristic, accused Anne of manipulating a young woman into a spotlight that did not belong to her. Anne's response was delivered without raised voice and with the precision of someone who had considered this conversation and decided long ago how it would end. If the spotlight finds her, Camilla, it is because the public sees what you are trying to hide. When Camilla delivered her final challenge, Anne allowed it to land and replied with 4 syllables that closed the exchange permanently. Neither were you. And yet here we are. The silence that followed was described by one witness as funeral grade. It confirmed, without any further elaboration required, that the balance of symbolic power within the House of Windsor had moved, and it was not moving back. On a morning when a thin veil of snow dusted the Lochside hills around Little Balmoral Manor, no press gathered at the gates. No ceremonial guard lined the stone path. No palace speechwriter had approved a single word of what was about to be said. Lady Louise Windsor stepped onto the steps of the estate in a forest green coat, her breath visible in the cold Highland air, accompanied only by 2 archivists and 1 discreet royal aide. The gathering before her was small and deliberately so. Local officials, historians, educators from the surrounding communities, people who had been invited not for their visibility, but for their connection to the land and the legacy it represented. What unfolded in the minutes that followed was not a performance, it was a declaration, and the difference between those 2 things was precisely the point. King Charles's sealed letter had arrived 4 days earlier, delivered by hand from the royal household and addressed in his own handwriting to my niece, the keeper of her flame. Inside was an offer of full elevation to Her Royal Highness, a formal Commonwealth portfolio centered on youth education, historical preservation, and cultural reconciliation, and a single line that palace aides said moved the king to tears as he committed it to paper. Your grandmother believed that greatness grows in silence. I now see she was speaking of you. It was a monumental gesture from a king who had watched his family fracture and reform around a young woman nobody had seen coming. For a brief and fragile moment, it seemed to draw the institution together around a single figure and a single idea. But Louise had made her decision long before the letter arrived, and the decision was not what the palace had anticipated. The place I inherited is not a stage, she began, her voice steady and unhurried in the Highland air. It is a stewardship. I do not claim it by blood but by trust, by the faith of a woman who led without noise and who served without demand. Then came the words no speechwriter had written. I am grateful for my family's trust and for the kindness extended to me, but I believe duty does not require a title, not today, not for me, and not for what this house stands to protect. There was no applause, only silence, the kind that settles over a space like something consecrated, confirming without elaboration that what has just been said will outlast the moment it was spoken in. She then unveiled the Grey House Initiative, a living trust structured with full legal independence from the Crown Estate, dedicated to preserving unseen royal archives, funding fellowships for women in ethical governance, and building a new generation of youth leaders rooted in historical responsibility. Princess Anne would serve as honorary co-chair. A civilian board would govern it entirely. This is not a museum, Louise said quietly. It is a promise that history, when guarded with care, can serve the future without spectacle. The speech drew 9 million views within 48 hours, most of them from demographics the monarchy had spent years trying and failing to reach through programming that always carried the faint, fatal scent of institution trying too hard. Charles's handwritten reply arrived the following morning. 2 sentences. You have chosen the harder path, but the truer one. Your grandmother would have smiled. Camilla retreated from public-facing engagements without announcement. Her exhibition was formally closed. Meghan Markle's ill-timed televised remarks about silence being mistaken for service drew a backlash so swift and so comprehensive that no follow-up appearance was scheduled. And Buckingham Palace quietly updated its official website with a change so small it would have been easy to miss, and so deliberate it was impossible to misread. No new title, no fresh styling. Just one name given its own dedicated subsection at the bottom of the family page. Lady Louise Windsor, keeper of Little Balmoral. Beneath it, a single quote from Queen Elizabeth II placed there by someone who understood exactly what it meant and exactly who it was for. It is not the crown that grants duty. It is duty that gives meaning to the crown. The monarchy had not been reformed by legislation or public pressure or institutional review. It had been quietly, permanently, and irrevocably recentered by a young woman in a forest green coat who stood on a set of stone steps in the Scottish Highlands and chose, when offered everything the institution could give her, to ask for nothing except the trust to guard what mattered most. No other caption was needed. None ever would be.